Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter.
Welcome back, folks, to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. I'm, of course, Sri, the West Coast CPG guy. Joining me today isn't my best friend, Peter Bond, and my regular co-host and partner on this journey. He's out at Bentonville, Arkansas. I wonder what took him to Bentonville, Arkansas. I think he loves that airport there. Therefore, it's our very own Omni-Comment Thursday host, Mr. Brian Gildenberg from Confluence of Commerce. We just wrapped up Women's Month on November on the CPG Guys last month. And did you get a chance to listen to all the wonderful female leaders we showcased on the show, from Katie Holtz of Grocery Shoppy to Diana Hosling from Colgate-Palmolive and so many others, total of 14, with 3 more coming in January over the course of the month of November 2022. Mr. Gildenberg, where and how are you today?
Well, I am your East Coast representative, as I'm in the scenic world headquarters of Confluence of Commerce in Newark, New Jersey, which is basically my living room. So I'm doing well, Sri.
Awesome. Now we gave away where the scenic headquarters of Confluence of Commerce is. So yes. Thank you for doing that. Before we get to our guests, let me remind our audience that all of our content can be found by going to a web browser and simply typing cpgguys.com. It's a brand new website with all sorts of rich content, including a merch store that y'all asked us for. I don't know who's buying our merch, Brian, but apparently they are. And episodes organized into themes like
off the shelves.
Somebody is.
Oh, get the t-shirt. You got to represent here. So
there we go. We got the logo thing going.
Got my East Coast Subway style t-shirt on today. So
there we go. East Coast, you remembered that too. I've got the California, a little bit more formal one over here. Of course, our episodes on the website are organized into themes like retail media, loyalty, analytics, etc. This episode will also have its own theme under analytics, and perhaps more to be dug up once we talk to our guests today. Sign up there for our forthcoming newsletter, which will start in Q1 of 2023. If you aren't already following us on LinkedIn, please do so. You'll only be joining 18,000 other industry professionals on an entertaining educational journey. We also manage to close group on LinkedIn, CPG e-commerce, and retail media professionals. Over 2,000 professionals have already joined and are contributing daily on those closed groups. Please consider doing so yourself. All you got to do is go to those groups, type the name on the search bar, and simply ask to be added, and we will do so. We are on other social media platforms because, again, you asked us to: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Check out our series on CPG Guys Knowledge Drops, the easiest way to find us on all those platforms. Go to the search, type CPG Guys Knowledge Drop. It's a fun way to learn about our industry. Remember to check out our partners, the FMCG Guys podcast, hosted by our friends Daniel and Efrain. They take the CPG Guys podcast format across the pond, speak to retail and FMCG luminaries from a European perspective all the way from Western Europe. All you got to do, visit fmcgguys.com and check out the latest addition to our family, CPG Scoop, hosted by Jennifer and Risa. Snackable conversations with industry veterans. We referred to the Thursday Brian Gildenberg Omni-Comment. There's the Tuesday Retail Media by Jeff Malmod from Mindshare. And now we have a brand new addition to announce: the CPG Tech Talk Saturdays, which will be from our friends and partners, Pair Commerce, a fun way to discover what's next in CPG, e-commerce, and technology. We're, of course, proud to partner with Next Up, formerly known as the Network of Executive Women, whose mission it is to advance all women in business and to promote the cause of gender equality and career development. Visit nextupisnow.org/CPGguys to learn more about this great group. Our commitment during Women's Month, November 2022, was we'll be supporter-level partners of this great org, and in 2023, we'll be giving out 50 memberships to Next Up. Stay tuned in January for more information how you can get one of those memberships. And now to the actual episode. To be successful in the rapidly changing digital economy, companies need to properly tackle digital transformation. Of course, it's not possible if it's not part of their business agenda. The speed of digitization is already running 800 miles an hour, if not 1,000 miles an hour, and will only continue to increase as consumers of demand forecasts throughout the business ecosystem mandates answers in real time. As more and more companies reinvent the way they do business, the efficiency of the digital economy will take over. Yeah, I said take over, and we'll see its full potential playing out publicly. And joining us for today's episode is Charles Chase, aka Charlie, as we will call him. As executive industry consultant for the SAS Institute, Charlie is a thought leader, author, and trusted advisor for delivering analytics-driven solutions to improve SaaS customers' supply chain efficiencies. And boy, are we waiting to hear from him. Charlie has more than 20 years of experience in the consumer packaged goods industry, an expert in demand forecasting, planning, market response modeling, econometrics, and supply chain management. And wow, in the last 2 years have we seen a lot of that come into play. Please join Brian and me in welcoming to the podcast Charlie Chase. Charlie, welcome. How you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me today.
Before we get to the questions Brian and I have prepared for our conversation, Charlie, would you let our audience know where on the web they can learn more about SAS Institute and tell us what SAS stands for? And would you kindly give us a brief introduction to the company itself and then specifically what you do for them?
Okay. Well, you can reach our website through www.sas.com. And SAS stands for Statistical Analytics Software. Everyone always asks me that. We're also the world's largest privately held software company. We've been in business now for 46 years. We have over 12,000 employees. We always are on the top of the world's best multinational workplaces list. We also have the highest customer retention rate of 94%. So those companies who license our software stay with us, 94% of them. We're in over 83,000 sites in over 140 countries. And we reinvest 26% of our annual revenue into R&D, and we've been doing that for 46 years consecutively, the highest in the industry. I'm the executive industry consultant for our global retail and consumer goods practice here at SAS. I'm involved in all different kinds of things. I sit on the marketing and innovation team, so I have a lot of fun innovating new capabilities, using our technology with big customers like Nestle, Mondelez, and Hanes Brands, and many others. That's the part of my job I really like the most. But I do enjoy writing and speaking, so I speak at large events, one-to-many, as well as to executive management teams, and become their trusted advisor. So it's not uncommon for Nestle, the senior management team in Vevey, to find out I'm traveling in Europe and ask me to stop by and see what's going on and share some of the types of analytics capabilities that we're providing our customers, not only in the area of demand forecasting and planning, but end-to-end supply chain and supply chain planning as well, and also other areas of the company. So we are the number one analytic company in the world, but we're also number one, according to Gartner, 8 years consecutive, not only in analytics, but also in data management and data integration and data quality. Okay. And recently, we were in an IDC supply chain planning survey and came out in the second tier as one of the leaders.
Congratulations to you and the SAS Institute for a 94% retention rate, and most importantly, for making it a habit to be on the best places for employees to work in the United States. That's a big deal. So thank you for that. We'll, of course, include the links to your LinkedIn profile, the SAS Institute website, and the digital liner notes of this podcast. And so let's get ready to rumble here, and I'll kick this off with question number one for you, Charlie. Your career, much like mine, is intersected with some of the largest CPG brands or just brands in the world, such as Johnson & Johnson, where I spent 5 years, Reckitt, Coca-Cola, amongst others. Take us through the years as you built your career in analytics and your advice for those who have the aspiration of growing the same way, especially in this new world of a post-COVID era of supply chain taking on a global prominence in ways that we've never seen before.
Well, as you know, COVID-19 and all the other disruptions that are occurring due to the new digital economy, as well as geoeconomic, political activities in the world, we've seen multiple disruptions. So it's sort of the perfect storm. And it's been a wake-up call, particularly for demand forecasting and planning, which I want to talk about in detail. But before that, I will give you a little background on myself. I've been fortunate to have met a lot of very smart people throughout my career. And many of them think outside the paradigm, like me. I like to push the envelope when it comes to analytics and planning. And I listen to them, and I'm very open to new approaches. And I think that's important for everyone, not just myself, but all of you that are in business or whatever you're doing in your career. And I started by listening to one of my undergraduate professors who told me the future was in analytics and computer science. And this was a long time ago. As my niece would say, I'm a dinosaur at this point in my life and career. But I majored in economics and minored in computer science, and he told me to take as many advanced analytics classes and computer classes as possible. So I took Calc 1 and 2, Business Stats 1 and 2, also Econometrics 1 and 2, and several computer programming classes. And many of those classes were taken as electives because they weren't required at the time. Wow, that's incredible. Now, when I did work on my MBA in quantitative economics and management information systems, I did take a business forecasting class, and that sort of changed my career. It sparked my interest in business forecasting, and I've never left that part of my career, only for a short time in market research. So during my early years of my career, I was fortunate to be hired by the VP of Marketing at J&J Consumer Products, who had the foresight and fortitude to build a demand forecasting and planning team that reported into marketing rather than operations planning. He wanted to move us downstream closer to the consumer because he felt that was where we would do the most accurate forecasting and also provide analytics. I was hiring data scientists back then in the early 90s, and when we didn't call them data scientists, they just had advanced degrees in analytics. So that's where we started to work on what I refer to as consumption-based forecasting and planning. So we took the learnings of all those companies, and I took all those learnings from J&J and implemented at several other companies that you mentioned in my intro. And overall, we successfully implemented consumption forecasting and planning at those companies with less data, less sophisticated technology than we have today. So this is not something that is new, okay? We were doing it almost 30 years ago. So my first real encounter with SAS technology was when I worked at Coca-Cola back in the late 90s, where I managed a small team of data scientists where we applied predictive analytic models like Airmax models and dynamic regression models, along with neural network models, which we call machine learning models today, okay? And we use those to not only predict 10-year momentum product forecasts, but also to assess the marketing mix and spend. So during those years, I always had one foot in academia as they're doing great analytical research, but they were always looking for data. So we provided them with the data. They ran the research. We took that research and applied it to real world situations at all those companies I worked at and found out that 90% of the research they do does work. They're just looking for real data to test it out. Then I started writing articles in various business forecasting journals, became active board member of various forecasting organizations where I started speaking. That led to over 100 articles, publications, blog posts, and 4 books. So that's really my career. And that was my first career. Then I started working at SAS 19 years ago. I wrote many of those books and articles while I was at SAS, by the way, as well. So my advice to anyone listening today is think outside the paradigm, invest in analytics, knowledge, and technology, and continue to learn. And most of all, pay it forward. One of my colleagues here at SAS a few years ago told me, he said, Charlie, you pay it forward more than any person I've ever met, and that's a good thing.
Brian, before we get to the next question, I have a question for you. Pay it forward is obviously the way to do it in life for anybody, I would say. But Brian, if he says his next of kin are calling his career a dinosaur, are you and I fossils?
I'm basically crude oil at that point, so I've already gone through the conversion process.
Well, I forgot to mention I started at 12. I was a protege, and I was already going to graduate school. No, I'm just kidding.
That makes me feel better. I got hope.
Yeah, it's that's excellent. All right. Well, question from the fossil section here. So you mentioned you got this new book, Consumption-Based Forecasting and Planning. Now, look, I know Paramount and MGM are in a bidding war for the movie rights. Brad Pitt's going to play you. So people are going to find out what's in the book when it's at the Oscars in 2024. But for people who don't want to wait, if people are going to read that book, what could they hope to find in there? And what's in there in particular about helping people make better and more educated decisions?
Okay. Well, actually, if you look at the title of the book, the longer title of the book is Consumption-Based Forecasting and Planning, Predicting Changing Demand Patterns in a New Digital Economy. So the subtitle is really the core of the book. I wrote the book during the first year and a half of the pandemic because I had a lot of time on my hands since I wasn't traveling so much, with the goal of sharing how we were innovating new things at SAS and new approaches to meet the challenges of retailers and consumer goods companies, because they were experiencing some major challenges at the time. So the book discusses how new unforeseen disruptions related to the pandemic and a new digital economy is a wake-up call for retailers and consumer goods companies. And many of these disruptions were directly related to COVID-19 as people were forced to self-isolate at home. So the digital economy was already changing the way consumers shop prior to the pandemic, which was really leading to the growth in the omnichannel. I think we'll probably talk about that a little more later on. And as a result, retailers and consumer products companies quickly realized that their traditional approach to demand forecasting and planning, their people skills, their processes, their analytics that they were applying, and the technology were not designed for unforeseen disruptions like we just experienced over the last 3 years. And as a result, they were unable to capture many of today's complex marketing dynamics. And their processes are plagued with bias, human error, waste, and inefficiencies. So there's been a convergence of the digital economy and the pandemic accelerating the need for change. So combined with continued SKU proliferation, short-term product life cycles, you have the perfect storm, introducing additional complexity. And finally, increased promotional and omni-channel shopping have rapidly expanded as a result of all this. And that points of contact between internal demand planners and sales and marketing have actually declined as a result of this. And there needs to be more contact. The result, retailers and consumer goods companies, supply chains have lacked demand visibility from customer to consumer. This is important, from customer to consumer. They tend to focus too much on the customer, not enough on the consumer when it comes to supply chain and demand forecasting and planning. This leads to manual intervention, increases in buffer stock that in order to respond to these fluctuations caused by these unforeseen disruptions in demand and supply.
So Charlie, couple questions. Number one, the CPG guys will get copies of the book. Are we qualifying to get personalized autographs from you, Charlie?
Well, that depends if you want to read it and then resell it on eBay. I heard it's not worth as much if I sign it, particularly if I put your name in there. So
the CPG guys know how to get it done though. I wouldn't worry about that part, but
trust me, the king of all merch, Peter Bond, will figure it all out. So
exactly, that's where I was going. But you referred to a lot about the unforeseen disruptions in this new economy. I don't want to call it a digital economy because digital in the CPG industry is actually a disruption. I've done this way too long to be here, and I need to acknowledge that it's actually a disruption, even though in reality it should not be. COVID-19, of course, was one. Economic pressures that we're all dealing with and seeing from a consumer standpoint, inflation, oil prices that have been volatile, fluctuating up and down, severe geopolitical disruptions none of us could have predicted, completely has flipped supply chain on its head. And you talked about one of the most important pieces of that is the inability to get an accurate forecast these days. As service rates have changed, what we all deemed as at 98 plus was the way to go, that was considered normal and appropriate and mature, is in the 85 range these days. So can you tell us how all of these combined have completely flipped supply chain on its head, and what's supply chain 2023?
Well, that's interesting. Let me take a quick moment here to get my thoughts together. But I think first and foremost, everyone is blaming just in time. They say, I guess just in time didn't work because we don't have the right inventory in the right place. And my answer to them is then you weren't really doing just in time. So what's been happening over the last 20 or 30 years is companies have been taking the complexity out of their supply chains and trying to reduce costs. And then as a result, they've actually taken out the agility and resilience of their supply chain. So let's go in a little more detail. What do I mean by that? If you wrap your supply chain around the world into one region for all your supply, and that region happens to be Asia, mainly China and a few other countries, and they go into shutdown because of pandemic, all your inventory is stopped and your raw materials. And that's not just in time. Just in time means you have manufacturing facilities all around the world in multiple regions, and you're sourcing those plants locally. So let me give you another example. When I worked at Coca-Cola back in the late 90s, a hurricane hit Puerto Rico. And that happens quite a lot recently. But up until that point, it never happened before. And it knocked out their syrup and concentrate plant that serviced all of Central America, including Mexico. So we were immediately able to run some simulations and found that we had excess capacity in Ireland, and we're able to fill that gap within 24 hours. And we never had an empty shelf anywhere in the Caribbean or Mexico as a result. And by the way, Mexico is their largest region. They buy more Coca-Cola per capita than any other country in the world, more than the U.S. So I think that's really where it's going. And I think the new supply chains have to become more agile, more resilient. They're going to have more regions where they can localize that and source that. And a lot of companies are talking about bringing it back to onshoring it. I don't think we're ever going to onshore it completely, but they're doing double shoring as well using other countries. Now, there is some discussions around having a pan-American onshoring. So what do I mean by that? Having Mexico be our primary manufacturing facilities for all of North America, as well as China, locally sourcing it. They have the capacity. They also have the workforce that's trained to do that. And you don't have to put it on a plane or a boat. You just put it in a truck and drive it across the border. So not only that, it reduces costs. So a Pan Am supply chain for North America is getting a lot of visibility. One of the people who's been talking about it quite a bit is Rob Anfield at NC State, who's the director of the supply chain consortium at NC State. He's also works a lot with SAS. He's one of our key partners working with a lot of different customers. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope so.
You certainly did, but you also kind of brought back a word that's now extinct and maybe fossil in nature, but I think it's a very important word, and that's the word Pan Am. Of course, when a lot of people think of Pan Am, they think of an airline and they think of American Airlines buying it. But the reality of the situation, Pan Am, as you refer to it, is supply chains now moving out of Asia, possibly. I'm not saying that's the way it'll be, but there's a possibility that they become nearshore, just as many of the call centers, et cetera, became nearshore. You know, there was this rapid 20 to 2010 where everything moved to Asia, and then some of it came back to be nearshore. So that word Pan Am, I think, for supply chain is getting as close as it can to the industry than it's ever been before. And thank you for pointing that out, Brian.
Yeah, there's a McKinsey survey I use a lot in presentations because this is something I've been trying to get clients' heads around for a while, like pre-pandemic even, just about the opportunity cost of their definition of just-in-time, which was really not just-in-time at all, but just trying to get to the lowest possible unit cost and calling it just-in-time. And I think like 44% of supply chain leaders in the apparel industry were looking at onshoring or nearshoring, partially because of supply chain disruption, but also because just the time and responsiveness you get is just so much different. You can't, anyway, this would be a whole different podcast about how I think this type of supply chain strategy created the entire small consumer packaged goods business, because all these brands were around that could respond to trend quickly because big companies couldn't, because under the auspices of just in time, they weren't delivering anything in any kind of time. So they were just out of time or jute. But I think, Charlie, to build on some of what you're talking about here. So you've mentioned a couple of times in here about the idea of forecasting from consumer to supply rather than from supply to the consumer. Talk a little bit more about what you mean by that. And in particular, how specifically can a company use some of the things you're talking about to become more consumer-centric in its approach to demand forecasting?
Certainly. What I mean by we need to forecast from consumer to supply versus supply to consumers, because consumer goods companies and even some large retailers are forecasting what they call demand, which is really shipments, what they're shipping into the distribution channel. Shipments are not true demand, even for a consumer goods company. That's the supply signal. And their demand planners report into operations planning too far upstream, removed from the consumer versus being downstream in marketing and sales, where I reported 90% of my career into marketing to the VP or the chief marketing officer at many of those companies. So my team was closer to the consumer and had access to consumer data, like point of sale data from large retailers, as well as syndicated scanner data, Nielsen and IRI. That's the true demand. That data is true demand for a consumer products company. And then not only that, these ERP solutions for supply chains were not designed for a disruptive economy like we're experiencing, or a disruptive global economy, I should say. So they tend to use very simplistic analytic models, what we call exponential smoothing or time series models, moving average. And by the way, there was a survey done, I think it was back in 2016 or 17. It said the most widely used analytics model for demand planners today is a moving average. That's insane.
Woo!
In 1992, I was using econometric models. In 1999 and 98 at Coke, we're using deep neural network models. How did that happen?
I've always used as a screen that as a history of philosophy major, that if I can understand the math that's powering a forecast, it's probably too simplistic. So that's just my basic going in assumption. And I know what a moving average is. So
to expand on what I'm saying is that if the demand planners were embedded down in marketing and sales, and if they had some data analysts, you don't even need to be a data analyst, you know a little bit about modeling, they would have been accessing the point of sale data and the syndicated scanner data. The POS data comes in daily, and the syndicated scanner data comes in weekly with a 1 to 2 week latency or lag. they would have seen these shifting demand patterns when we went into lockdown within the first 5 to 6 days. But instead, they're forecasting shipment supply, and they're forecasting, in many cases, monthly, not even weekly. So they didn't see these shifting demand patterns until 6 to 8 weeks later. And it was already too late. The shelf was empty. They had no chance on replenishing that shelf at that point. Because it's also, remember, it's easy to turn off the supply chain, but it's much harder to turn it on and ramp it up. It takes much longer.
Well, and I think so much of what you're talking about here, to go back to that just-in-time thing that you talked about before, you said that's not just-in-time. So many people forget that time is one of the words in just-in-time. Right?
Yes.
So, and the slowness with which people approach just-in-time is, I don't know, like any number of people I've met in their attitude to punctuality. It's like, if I show up within the hour I'm supposed to, I'm on time. So they are doing just-in-time appearance at a party or something like that. So, but I think it's a really interesting concept, how not only are you using different sensors, different models, but also just simply different processes and frequencies of evaluating it to be able to get to the outcome.
Yeah. And what we're doing is what we propose, and we're doing this with several of our customers successfully, like Nestle and Mondelez and Hanes brands, is we're tapping into that syndicated scanner data and POS data. We're modeling it, running simulations around it, and then taking the history and the simulated forecast from that and using that as a leading indicator in their shipment models. So now we're modeling the push-pull effects of their business using analytics and data versus judgment. Today, a lot of companies do look at the POS data, the demand planners, or the Nielsen data, but they overlay it on top of shipments, and then they manually adjust shipments. What we're saying is that doesn't work very well. You have to let the data and the analytics drive those changes in the data. And we're using machine learning on top of that. So with machine learning, it starts to learn. So we're doing some really cool things, particularly with some of our innovation partners. Nestle is our biggest innovation partner. Things around assisted demand planning using machine learning, where we can provide a demand planner with a digital assistant. This is a patented approach that we've created with them. What happens is the machine learning over time follows the adjustments, the manual adjustments that a demand planner makes to the shipments, and then learns from that and tells them where and when and by how much and what direction to make changes and where in the hierarchy. Today, they live in an Excel world, which is very difficult and not scalable. So they have to do mass aggregated adjustments. Here, with a digital assistant, and if you're in the cloud, because all our products now are cloud native and run on Microsoft Azure, as well as AWS and other platforms. We prefer Microsoft Azure. And so it's scalable. And the digital assistant tells them how deep to go in the hierarchy. So now they can go all the way down to the execution point by SKU, by ship to. That's where you should be focused on your accuracy, not at the very aggregate level, where most companies are today. And you have to move to weekly data because promotions are also disruptions, and those promotions run weekly. So if you try to model a promotion using monthly data, you're not going to see very much significance because it washes out the impact. So they run promotions 1 to 3 to 4 to 6 weeks. We can actually model those promotions, and we can also pick up the seasonality, the trend, and other factors like price, in-store merchandising, gross margins. All those things can be modeled today, and simulations can be run in those. And we can even take the results and embed those into intelligent planning workbooks, what I refer to as dynamic concurrent planning workbooks, where everyone can have a different view of their world. So sales and marketing, demand planning, supply planning, financial planning, but they're all connected through a common data layer. And the results of the models are embedded in those workbooks so they can run simulations. They don't have to be a data scientist or an analyst. They just need to know the business. So a marketing planner can say, what if we run this promotion another week to flush out some inventory? We're going to extend that promotion into week 6 in March, third week of March. How will that impact revenue, incremental volume, as well as our gross profit margin? So does it actually pay out? If it does pay out, then they can say, I want to run this. They send it to their boss using real workflow. They review it, say, yes, that works great. Once it gets approved, the results of that hits the demand planner workbook, the financial work planner, supply planner, and they can then run various simulations in their world to look at inventory capabilities. How's that going to impact OTIF, on-time delivery in full? Is it going to impact customer service levels, and they can do that prior to the S&OP meeting or the IBP meeting, or actually do it live, or I should say, live and near real time. It's never real time in front of those executives in the room. They could say, how can we close the gap in this product group, in this brand? And they say, well, let us show you. That capability is here today now. We can do that in real time.
Thank you for that. Let me remind our audience that we're speaking to Charlie Chase from the SAS Institute. The first half of this episode, we focused on demand planning, supply chain in general, and Charlie's view on the industry and where it stands. The second half, we're going to connect the dots here from SAS Institute's role in helping you, the CPG brand and retail, with all of this. So keeping that in mind, the first thing, Charlie, I'd like to drive into is short-term demand sensing. How does short-term demand sensing play into this new approach? We talked a lot about just-in-time. Brian called it JUT, which in my opinion, just-in-time is a great fancy word that was used for decades without outcomes, with the exception of maybe Japan and auto manufacturing in certain cases. But is concurrent demand planning playing a factor? And then how does it support the IBP as you described it? And then what can SAS Institute do to help in that space?
Well, today we have, like I mentioned, we have intelligent planning workbooks that are dynamically connected, allowing sales, marketing, demand planning, supply planning, financial planning to collaborate in near real time. We can take those results, the results of those predictive analytic models and machine learning models, embed the results in those workbooks so they can run what-if simulations at all different levels across the supply chain organization, as well as in sales and marketing. In fact, I personally feel that we should change the definition of supply chain and add sales and marketing to it, because without sales and marketing, there's no need for the supply chain. Their demand generation, their job is to create demand. Without demand, we don't need supply. So they should be part of the definition of supply chain planning. So each one of those functions can have different views today. They don't need Excel. We can do all this in a cloud native environment on Microsoft Azure, and they can all be connected through this common data layer and running simulations back and forth to come up with the optimal plan to move forward in the IBP process and then the S&OP process. So I think I gave you an example where a marketing person could decide to extend a weekly promotion, look at the impact on revenue, gross margin, and see how if that promo change is going to drive incremental volume and revenue, but also profit. Because, most promotions don't pay out. They actually lose money. So it's important today to make sure that not only does that promotion generate new consumers, but also generate some profit. Okay. And then once that's approved through the workflow, those results can be driven upstream to all the other functions in our organization, and they can run their own simulations in preparation for the IBP process. So these same illustrations can support both the S&OP and IBP processes in near real time, prior to those meetings or during those meetings. And it also gives sales and marketing the opportunity to participate in a meeting. Today, one of the reasons why S&OP has failed, and I really feel like it failed, is because a lot of people don't really realize that the S stands for sales and marketing. And most of the time, they don't show up. Only the operations planning team shows up, and all they talk about is OP, about inventory cost, about lowering inventory, safety stock. The only metric I think they share outside customer service levels may be how they're going to pay for OTIF fines when they don't get it there in time and in full. Marketing uses different data. They use point of sale syndicated data. Supply chain uses transactional data, or shipments, what we call, and they don't share common metrics horizontally. That's the main reason why that process failed. So what we've done is renamed S&OP IBP, added another layer, financial management, and now they do something called roll and hold. I don't know if you ever heard of this term, roll and hold. Some people call it snowplow.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so they say, take last month's miss, roll it into next month, and hold to the financial plan. So whenever I was at a meeting, I would raise my hand and say, excuse me, but what makes you think you're going to make next month's forecast or plan plus the 10% you missed this past month? And I love what executive sales team says, well, we're going to be focused. And I said, but weren't you focused last month? Well, we're going to be more focused this month. So I said, there's no way you're going to make next month's plan and another 10%. So we're going to lower the forecast. And you need to come up with some programming that's 3 to 6 months out that our retail channel partners can execute against. And then we'll put that volume back in the plan. And we'll actually forecast at a model to double check your numbers to make sure you're not overestimating the impact. So that's where consumption planning and forecasting come in, because we can model that kind of stuff. You can say we're going to run an additional promotion in week 46, 47, 48. Right now we're in week 26 and 36, and we're going to run that at Target, and Target will have time to prepare for it, and marketing and sales will as well, to have the marketing materials in place. And then we can actually model that and show them what the impact would be based on prior promotions that are similar to that, using data and analytics, not gut feeling judgment.
And Charlie, you used a very important word there that I cannot go to the next question till we decompose it a little bit, and that is OTIF. OTIF obviously is a big dollar line item for many CPG brands today in this volatile supply chain environment.
It's clearly a 4-letter word.
And so I do want to pick your brain here for if there was a piece of advice you could leave with CPG companies on the OTIF piece, would it be what you've already said, which is via the intelligent planning workbook, forecast and plan better, but most importantly, make it a collaboration between marketing, selling, and supply chain? Like, what would be that biggest top line advice you'd give to make this a whole better process to reduce OTIF?
Well, my personal experience is, you need to engage in sales and marketing to understand what programming they're using to influence consumers to buy the product. And you have to invest in predictive analytics and possibly machine learning. Okay. Today, you're using simple algorithms that only can model trend and seasonality. What happens when the trend and seasonality is disrupted by a disruption? That makes sense? Disrupted
Sure.
by a disruption. Okay. and your trend and seasonality are no longer valid. So how are you going to possibly predict what demand is going to be? And you're too far removed from the consumer to even see the shifting demand signals, which is very important. So what you have to do is think outside the box. Remember in the beginning, I told you that I met a lot of people who think outside the paradigm. Well, that's my whole career. Let's push the envelope and think outside the box. So let me give you an example. A direct-to-consumer retailer in Europe came to us right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I guess it was 6 months into the pandemic, and they were seeing huge shifts in the purchasing of these food products that they provide to consumers because they were going into lockdown. So they were changing the way they were buying products because they were cooking more at home. And they were seeing this immediately. And they were using our technology, and they weren't doing bad. But what we did is we went in and said, well, what data represents the lockdown and this disruption? Well, we found that epidemiological data was key. And SAS created a epidemiological dashboard that was collecting data by region, by category, by different areas of the world. And they could tap into that, and it was weekly data. And then local economic data, Google Trends, believe it or not. We also brought in Google Trends. So what we did is we first applied machine learning because they were using your basic time series, models that looked at seasonality and trend, and we kept that in there. We also connected their POS data. We had put that in as a leading indicator, Google Trends. So we started out with an accuracy rate by SKU, by customer at 79% weekly. Now, most companies that I know that are CPG companies, monthly at the total aggregate level don't have that accuracy. It's around 65 to 70% at total. This is at the lowest level hierarchy. Then we added Google Trends, and it went up. Then we added local economic data, epidemiological data. When it was all said and done, their average accuracy was 91.2% across their entire product portfolio in the height of the lockdown.
Awesome.
So using analytics, more advanced models, thinking outside the box, looking at different data when your trend and seasonality is disrupted, that represents the disruption that's occurring. Those things will help you predict better, and that will help you reduce your OTIF fines because you'll be able to shift the products in full on time.
Makes sense. And let's build on that a little bit, because you mentioned that you did this for a D2C company in Europe. And given they're not called OTIF in this environment, but given the supply chain expense that a retailer like Amazon can cost a CPG company, let's talk a little bit about the omnichannel world for a second. Mm-hmm. My guess is you would say that the problem of omnichannel isn't radically different than the problem of any other problem. If you're starting with the consumer, you just work your way back. Mm-hmm. What about the nature of digital commerce, though, in terms of whether it's the demand signals that are different or the size of the orders that's different? And what about omnichannel makes what you're doing different, if anything? And how are companies sort of responding to that within the context of demand, integrated business planning analytics and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, in the spirit of CPG, I'm going to try to answer that question. So prior to the pandemic, most CPG companies were not forecasting demand for their products in the omni-channel for the most part. So, for example, demand being generated online, mobile devices, and Amazon, for example. In fact, roughly, I guess, on average, about 2% of CPG companies' volume prior to the pandemic were being sold through Amazon, that channel. Today, as much as 20% is being sold through that channel. So that was a big aha and a wake-up call for these CPG companies. So now most of our customers that I talk to are now forecasting all their products that they sell in the Amazon channel. Okay. And also CPG companies prior to the pandemic weren't really doing a lot of direct-to-consumer selling. Today, now, Gillette, Hanesbrands, and a lot of other companies are selling direct to consumers, bypassing their normal traditional brick-and-mortar channels. Okay, so that's happening a lot because of the pandemic. And then you also have click and collect, curbside pickup, and others that have made it difficult to determine where to position the inventory as well. So that's been a big challenge, and that's going to continue to be a challenge. But I think now they're looking at those channels seriously. They're starting to collect that information, that data, and moving to a digital format allows them to collect that data in store. So let me give you another example. This happens to be a retail example, but if you go into Macy's, they have beacons, devices all over the store, and they're collecting information. So if I sign up to Macy's and create a profile online, and I start buying products either online or I go into the brick and mortar store, then they're collecting all that information about me. So in January, I'm going to be in New York City at the NRF conference, the National Retail Federation, and I may go into Macy's. And if I walk into Macy's, the minute I walk in, if I turn my iPhone on, the beacons are going to connect to me. Say, wow, Charlie Chase is in the store and he's walking towards men's suits. He's a size regular, medium, and he likes Perriella suits, European cut, and he likes blue, brown, black, and gray. So I'm immediately getting hit and pinged on my iPhone saying, today and today only, we have a 25% off promotion on Perriella suits. And by the way, Charlie, we have your size in black and blue in store, and we have the other colors on our East Side store. Do you want us to ship them to your house? Now, let's take that a step further. Think about that in a retail grocery store. So I'm in a retail grocery store, and I have computer vision. I have electronic shelf capabilities. I'm monitoring the shelf using digital technology. And if I'm running a promotion, I could start to see the velocity of the shelf and realize quickly, I'm going to run out of inventory on shelf. So I'm going to send a signal, and I'm using event stream processing. I mean, machine learning. The machine learning sends a signal back to the merchandiser, says you need to re-merchandise the shelf. And by the way, you're only down to 2 cases in the back of the store. You need to order more from the warehouse. And then the warehouse gets that and says, wow, we're only down to 1 pallet. We need to send cut an order to the CPG manufacturer. And then on top of that, on the shelf, we have electronic pricing. So as the velocity increases, the electronic pricing senses it and raises price to slow down the velocity until we can restore the shelf. That technology is here today. It's expensive and it costs a lot, but it's achievable.
Well, Moore's law will kick in. It'll get cheaper and more productive over time. But so for those of us that are like in the back of the room shooting spitballs at each other during the grad school class here, is it safe to say that one of the core things that all of this innovation seems to be driving, whether it's digital commerce or the digitization of the in-store experience, with more granular data, the importance of machine learning to process that data becomes geometrically more important? Because without machine learning, there's no way you can handle that volume of data. Is that a fair summation of some of where you're trying to go with that?
Yeah, and let me expand on that for a second, if that's okay. Today, we talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence. A lot of people say to me when I talk to them, Charlie, I really don't understand what AI is and what it does. But, people tell me someday it's going to solve world hunger. And I say, well, not in our lifetime. And other people say the machines are going to take over the world. And I say, well, that only happens in Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. So there's always going to be collaboration between humans and the machines, or oversight by the humans. So let's flip the letters from AI to IA, intelligent automation. So what is intelligent automation? We want to automate all the mundane, repetitive, non-value add work around gathering information and data, harmonize it and standardizing it. And then we want to provide insights so people can work smarter and faster to make better decisions, more value-add decisions. That's really what AI is designed to do. So let me say that again. We're going to automate all the repetitive, mundane, repetitive work, particularly that work is done in Excel by demand planners and others in the organization. Automate that, and then provide them with near real time. I never say real time because nothing is truly real time. Near real time to make them smarter so they can make faster, more value-add decisions. And that's how we look at AI at SAS. It's all about intelligent automation. And when I explain it to people in that format, they tend to get it. They say, okay, I understand now, Charlie. But I follow up with a real-world example. So I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, and you can go on the internet and find this out. United Airlines was going to fly from Hawaii to San Francisco. So 276 passengers, 12 crew members. And before the flight, the pilot and co-pilot ran all this analysis and headwinds, and they put it all into the autopilot, which is first generation AI. So once they got up in the air, they put it on autopilot. So that's AI running the plane, and they're having their coffee. And all of a sudden, the co-pilot looks at one of the gauges and says, whoa, the headwinds are much stronger than we thought, and does some side calculations. We're going to run out of fuel and crash. We're not going to make it to San Francisco. So they called the tower, turned around and went back, refueled, and they made it safely to San Francisco. Now, I presented this same scenario, which is true. It's a true story, to some customers. It was about a month ago. And one of them said, well, wait a minute, Charlie, but doesn't AI even do more than that? And I said, yeah, that's first generation AI. So what does second generation AI do, which we have today? Well, what would have happened when it got up in the air, instead of the co-pilot looking at the gauge, the machine learning would have sent a red flag, and then it would have sent a message to them saying, hey, by the way, the headwinds are way stronger than you told me, and we're going to run out of fuel, but you have 3 options. 1, you can go to a higher altitude and cut the distance and make it there. 2, you can slow the plane down and hopefully make it there. Or 3, you should turn around and refuel. That's intelligent automation at its best, and it's leaving the pilot and the co-pilot to make the final decision. And that's really where we are today. We talk a lot about autonomous supply chains. I don't see us being there in the real near future, maybe. But it's never going to be totally autonomous. There's always going to need human oversight.
So we are out of time for this episode. So let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content by going to a web browser and typing cpgguys.com as the URL. And if you think you or your company has some thought leadership to contribute to our community discussion, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Again, that's contact@cpgguys.com. And maybe you can join us, just like Charlie, on this podcast. Don't forget to drop us a rating at cpgguys.com with the navigation bar up top. That tells us how we're doing and also informs us whether we have the right programming for you. Thank you to our 18K plus and fast growing followership on LinkedIn. Charlie, what a power-packed episode. You've connected the dots between all the disruptions in the supply chain industry, especially the one that's now anchored digitally, the different pieces of the ecosystem of supply chain that the SAS Institute can help with. I love the workbook that we referred to right up front as well. So thank you for coming here on the CPG Guys and giving us the entire scoop of decomposing supply chain in under 45 minutes. I do appreciate that, Charlie.
Yep, it was my pleasure. Thank you again for asking me to be on today.
To my co-host, Mr. Gildenberg, what a power-packed episode, man. I don't know how you're going to summarize that, but go for it.
Yeah, I don't either, but I think there's a few really big ideas in here. The biggest idea I think that came out consistently, at least for me, was the notion that supply chain and demand are, quote, different things and different functions was never true and is now, in particular, as you try to manage supply chain in a more dynamic demand environment, becomes completely and utterly untrue and actually quite harmful if you try to run them that way. So all of your comments about, the S&S and OP never showed up the right way, and that it just turned into OP with a little bit of S to pay the fines, all of the conversation around using demand sensing to really understand how to build the supply chain, your experience running, the great good fortune you've had to have spent most of your career running demand supply chain type work, but under the auspices of the demand creation side of the business. I think that experience gave you a unique perspective on this, and I hope is really inspiring to the audience that's trying to figure this out. I thought your point about too much emphasis on customer and not enough on the consumer is, I think Sri would nod vigorously in terms of the collective understanding that we have of how this industry tries to process these problems. And the accountabilities of the people responsible for fixing these problems are largely customer centric. And all the conversation that you had around the need for mutual KPI understanding and the ability to, when you need to, incent different functions towards different types of KPIs, I thought was really good. And I thought all the conversation around machine learning was really interesting. And that concept of instead of AI, IA is a really powerful one, that instead of artificial intelligence, what we should really be gunning for is we don't have robots today that can solve problems, but we do have people. And if you make those people better at solving problems, that's probably way more likely in the short term to have a positive outcome. So in addition to a whole bunch of really fascinating things, I also thought the just-in-time conversation is an unbelievably important one. I think it's hard to overestimate the degree of damage that poor understanding of what just-in-time inventory was supposed to do has done to this industry in general, not just on the supply chain side, but on the opportunities to capture demand. And whether it is nearshoring, onshoring, Pan-American sourcing, I think this is going to be a very big topic of conversation, and I'm glad we got to cue that up today. So those are some of the things I took out, Troy, but I could just repeat everything Charlie said for 40 minutes, but I don't think that'd be terribly.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Charlie. Folks, you'll hear it here on the CPG Guys. If you don't know, I'm very sure SAS is already in at your CPG brand today, but you heard a lot from Charlie about how you could refresh some of those capabilities, get closer to what Brian and I would call real just-in-time versus JUT, as Brian described it. And in this volatile supply chain ecosystem, getting to more accurate demand forecasting, I can't even, you all know I have a day job. I care a lot about it. And I can't tell you the importance of getting to better inventory forecasting overall and being able to improve your service rates. We even talked about OTIF for Pete's sake on this one that I never anticipated we'd do on this episode. But thanks, folks. That's a wrap. And see you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.